The gunshot that rang out across the dusty main street of Victor, Colorado wasn't meant for Rachel Catherine Kingston. But the bullet still grazed her shoulder as she stood loading supplies onto her wagon in the spring of 1882. She didn't scream or faint like the other women who scattered into doorways and behind water troughs. Instead, she dropped behind her wagon wheel, pulled the rifle from beneath the driver's seat, and fired a warning shot over the heads of the two drunken miners who were shooting at each other over a card game dispute. Her shot was so precise and her voice so commanding when she ordered them to drop their weapons that both men froze mid-draw, suddenly sober enough to realize a woman half their size had just stopped their foolish quarrel. "Get yourselves to the sheriff's office before I change my mind about where I aim next," Rachel said, standing tall despite the blood seeping through her cotton sleeve. The miners stumbled away, and she calmly finished loading her supplies as if nothing had happened, though her hands trembled slightly as she hefted a 50-pound sack of flour into the wagon bed. "Doctor." Morrison came rushing out of his office across the street, his medical bag in hand, but Rachel waved him off. "It's barely a scratch, doctor. I've got iodine and bandages at the ranch." "Miss Kingston, you are the most stubborn woman in Lake County," the elderly physician said with exasperation mixed with admiration. "At least let me look at it." Rachel allowed him a quick examination right there on the street, her jaw set firm as he confirmed it was indeed superficial. As he bandaged it with practiced efficiency, she could hear the whispers starting up again from the townspeople who had emerged from their hiding places. She'd heard those whispers her entire 23 years, growing louder since her father died 2 years ago and left her the ranch. "Too headstrong for her own good," Mrs. Patterson said loudly enough to be heard, fanning herself on the mercantile porch. "No man will ever want a wife who can outshoot and outwork him," added Mrs. Chen, the laundry owner's wife, though her tone held more sympathy than judgment. "Independence is all well and good, but a woman needs a husband to protect and provide for her," Reverend Stiles intoned as he passed by with his wife on his arm. Rachel had heard it all before. Every Sunday at church, every social gathering, every time she came to town alone to conduct business. The good people of Victor seemed to believe it was their sacred duty to remind her that her independent ways were unnatural and unseemly. Her ranch was one of the most profitable in the area, her cattle healthy and her books balanced. But none of that mattered to those who believed a woman's place was in a home with a husband and children, not negotiating prices with buyers or breaking horses or mending fences. She'd had suitors over the years, men attracted by her striking looks, her auburn hair that caught fire in the sunlight, her green eyes that could be soft as spring grass or hard as bottled glass, depending on the situation. But every single one had made it clear that marriage would mean giving up the ranch, giving up her independence, giving up everything her father had worked for and everything she'd built on her own. They wanted her to be decorative and docile, to abandon her worn work dresses for fancy frills, to let them make all the decisions while she focused on needlework and recipes. She'd sent every one of them packing. "Thank you, doctor," Rachel said when he finished tying off the bandage. She climbed onto the wagon seat with fluid grace despite her injury, gathered the reins, and clicked her tongue at her two horses. The matched pair of bays moved forward smoothly, and she guided them out of town without looking back at the staring faces. The ride to her ranch took 40 minutes along a winding mountain road that offered breathtaking views of the Sangre de Cristo Range. The spring snowmelt had turned the valleys green, and wildflowers dotted the meadows in splashes of purple, yellow, and white. This land, this wild, beautiful country, was worth every whispered judgment and every lonely night. Her father had taught her to love it, to respect it, and to work it with her own two hands. She wasn't about to give that up for anyone. The Kingston Ranch sprawled across 300 acres of prime grazing land with mountain streams running through it. The two-story house her father had built sat on a small rise, commanding a view of the barn, the corrals, and the distant cattle. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid and comfortable, with real glass windows and a stone fireplace that could heat the whole downstairs in winter. Rachel's ranch hand, an older Mexican man named Miguel who had worked for her father for 20 years, came out of the barn when he heard the wagon. His weathered face creased with concern when he saw her bandaged arm. "What happened?" he asked in accented English, hurrying over. "Stray bullet from some drunk miners." "I'm fine," Rachel assured him. "Help me unload these supplies, would you?" They worked together in comfortable silence, a routine they'd established over the years. Miguel had been skeptical when Rachel announced she was keeping the ranch after her father's death, but she'd proven herself capable time and again. Now he was her most loyal supporter, even when his wife urged him to find work on a ranch with a proper male owner. "That injury needs rest," Miguel said firmly when they'd finished. "I will handle the evening feeding." Rachel wanted to argue, but the throbbing in her shoulder convinced her to accept the help. She went inside, heated water on the stove, and cleaned the wound properly before applying fresh bandages. Then she made herself a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and coffee, eating alone at the kitchen table as she did most nights. The loneliness never bothered her during the day when there was work to do, horses to train, cattle to check on, accounts to manage. But in the quiet evenings, she sometimes wondered if the townspeople were right. Not about needing a man to provide for her, she could do that herself, but about the partnership aspect. It would be nice to have someone to share the work, the worries, the small victories, and the daily struggles. Someone who saw her strength as an asset rather than a flaw to be corrected. She was washing her dishes when she heard horses approaching fast, too fast for a friendly visit. Rachel dried her hands, grabbed her rifle, and stepped onto the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and in that light she could see 3 riders coming up the road at a gallop. They weren't men she recognized. Rachel levered around into the chamber and waited, her rifle held casually but ready. The riders slowed as they approached, clearly noticing the armed woman on the porch. They stopped at a respectful distance, and the man in the middle removed his hat. "Evening, madam," he called out. "We're looking for the Kingston Ranch. I was told in town that Richard Kingston was the owner." "Richard Kingston was my father," Rachel said, her voice steady. "He passed 2 years ago. I'm Rachel Kingston, the owner now. What's your business?" The 3 men exchanged glances. They were dusty from hard traveling, their horses lathered and tired. The speaker was younger than his companions, perhaps 30 or so, with dark hair and serious gray eyes. Something about him seemed different from the usual run of cowhands or drifters. "My name is Henry Harrison O'Brien, madam. These are my brothers, Samuel and Thomas. We're trailing a herd up from Texas, bound for the railhead in Pueblo. We've been on the trail for near 3 months now, and we've lost 2 men to accidents along the way. We're short-handed and still have a week's drive ahead through rough country. I was told in Victor that the Kingston Ranch might have experienced hands looking for temporary work." Rachel studied them carefully. Trail drives were grueling work, and it wasn't uncommon for outfits to hire local help for the final push to the railhead. The money was good, and Miguel's nephew had been asking about work. But something made her curious about these men, especially the one doing the talking. "How many head?" she asked. 2,000 longhorns, Henry said. We started with 2,300, but we lost some crossing rivers and to rustlers near the New Mexico border. Rustlers? Rachel's interest sharpened. Rustling had been a problem in the area lately. Small outfit, only 4 men. We drove them off, but not before they scattered part of the herd. Took us 2 days to round them all up again, and we lost about 100 head that ran too far or fell in rough country. You drive them off permanently? Rachel asked, her meaning clear. Henry held her gaze. One of them won't be rustling again. The others ran when they realized we wouldn't let them have the herd without a fight. We reported it to the law in Trinidad, but I don't expect they'll catch them. Rachel nodded slowly. This man wasn't a braggart or a hothead. He stated facts plainly, without embellishment or false modesty. She appreciated that. I've got one experienced hand who might be interested, and his nephew who's young but a hard worker. They're both skilled with cattle and horses. But you should know, I set the terms and the pay rate. If you work for my men, you work according to my standards. Henry's eyebrows rose slightly. Your men, madam. That's right. This is my ranch, Mr. O'Brien. I run it. I make the decisions, and I expect to be treated as the owner, not as some temporary placeholder until a man comes along to take over. If that's a problem for you, you can try your luck elsewhere. She'd given this speech before, and it usually ended with men riding away, sometimes with muttered insults about uppity women. But Henry O'Brien surprised her. He glanced at his brothers, and while the younger one looked skeptical, the older one shrugged as if to say, why not? Henry turned back to Rachel with something that might have been respect in his eyes. No problem at all, madam. We need good men, and if they work for you, that tells me they are probably better than average. What's your rate? They negotiated briefly, Rachel holding firm on her price and Henry agreeing without much haggling. It was a fair rate, and they both knew it. Rachel called for Miguel, who emerged from the barn wiping his hands on a rag. She explained the situation in a mixture of English and Spanish, and Miguel's eyes lit up at the mention of wages. My nephew Carlos would be eager for this work, Miguel said. He has been helping me here and learning well. I can do without him for 2 weeks if the pay is this good. Can you bring him here tomorrow morning? Henry asked. We'll need to head back to the herd by mid-morning. They're bedded down about 5 miles south, but I don't like leaving them too long with so few men watching. We will be here at dawn, Miguel promised. As the 3 O'Brien brothers prepared to ride back to their camp for the night, Henry hesitated. Miss Kingston, I hope you don't mind me saying, but that's a fresh bandage on your arm. You all right? Rachel was surprised by his concern. Caught the edge of a stray bullet in town today. Nothing serious. Henry's expression darkened. Victor seems like a rough town. It has its moments, Rachel allowed, but I can handle myself. I don't doubt that, madam. Henry settled his hat back on his head. Thank you for the help with the men. We'll see you at dawn. Rachel watched them ride away, something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Henry O'Brien had looked at her like she was a real person, not a curiosity or a problem to be solved. He'd negotiated with her as an equal and hadn't questioned her authority over her own property and employees. It was such a small thing, basic respect, but it was so rare in her experience that it caught her attention. She shook off the feeling and went back inside. She had no time for foolish attractions to passing strangers, no matter how respectfully they treated her. The next morning arrived clear and cold, the way spring mornings often did at this elevation. Rachel was up before dawn, feeding the chickens and checking on the milk cow before putting on coffee. She was scrambling eggs when Miguel and Carlos arrived on horseback. Carlos was 19, eager and competent, excited by the prospect of joining a real trail drive even for just the final leg. The O'Brien brothers rode in just as the sun was breaking over the eastern peaks, right on time. Rachel invited them in for breakfast, an offer that made the younger brother, Thomas, grin with delight. "Haven't had a home-cooked meal since we left Texas," he said, practically bouncing into her kitchen. Rachel served up eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy along with strong coffee. The men ate with the single-minded focus of people who'd been living on trail food for months. She watched them covertly, noting the way Henry made sure his brothers got their share before taking his own, the way he thanked her sincerely for the meal, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work, and the intelligence in his eyes that suggested he was more than just a cowhand. "You trailing your own herd or working for an outfit?" Rachel asked as they ate. "Our own cattle," Samuel, the older brother, answered. "Our father ran a ranch outside of San Antonio. When he died last year, he left it to the three of us jointly. We're hoping to get enough from this sale to expand the operation and maybe buy some breeding stock from Colorado ranches. The cattle up here are hardier, better suited to rough country." "Your father taught you the business?" Rachel asked. "He did," Henry said. "Every aspect of it, from breeding to branding to business. He believed in making sure we could run the place ourselves, not just give orders to hired men." "Sounds like a wise man," Rachel said, thinking of her own father who had done the same for her, despite the disapproval of neighbors who thought he should have been grooming a son instead. "He was," Henry agreed, though he took some grief for it from folks who thought ranching should be left to the professionals while the owners counted their money from a distance. "I know something about taking grief for how you run your operation," Rachel said dryly. Henry met her eyes across the table, and she saw understanding there. "I expect you do, Miss Kingston." After breakfast, the business was concluded quickly. Carlos would ride back with the O'Briens and work the herd for the next week to 10 days, however long it took to reach the Pueblo railhead. Miguel would cover his nephew's regular duties at the Kingston ranch. The pay would be delivered when the drive was complete. As the men prepared to leave, Henry lingered on the porch for a moment. "Miss Kingston, I'm curious about something, if you don't mind me asking." "Go ahead," Rachel said, though she braced herself for the usual questions about why a woman was running a ranch alone. "That rifle you're carrying, is that a Winchester model 1873? Rachel glanced down at the weapon in her hands, surprised by the question. "It is. My father gave it to me for my 18th birthday. Fine gun," Henry said appreciatively. "I've got the same model. Best repeating rifle made, in my opinion. You know how to use it, I take it?" "I do. My father taught me to shoot when I was 10. Figured any child of his should know how to protect themselves and the ranch." "Smart man," Henry said again. "A ranch this size, this far from town, you need to be able to handle yourself, especially now that you're running it alone." There it was, Rachel thought, waiting for the inevitable suggestion that she needed a man's protection. But Henry just smiled slightly and added, "Though I suspect any fool who tries to take advantage of you would be in for an unpleasant surprise." Rachel found herself smiling back. "You suspect correctly, Mr. O'Brien. Call me Henry, please. Mr. O'Brien was my father. Then call me Rachel." "Rachel," he said, as if testing how her name felt. "We'll take good care of your man, Carlos. I'll make sure he gets back safe with his wages." "I appreciate that." Henry tipped his hat and mounted his horse with easy grace. Rachel watched the 4 men ride south toward the herd, and she stood there on the porch longer than necessary, watching until they disappeared from view. The next week passed in the usual rhythm of ranch work. Rachel mended fences, checked the cattle, trained a young gelding she hoped to sell, and managed the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running. Miguel worked longer hours to cover Carlos's absence, but he didn't complain. The boy would come back with good money and valuable experience. Rachel went into Victor twice that week for supplies and to conduct business with her banker, Mr. Thornton, who remained one of the few men in town who treated her with consistent respect. Each time, she endured the stares and whispers, the pointed comments about her unmarried state and her unwomanly occupation. On her second trip, Mrs. Patterson's daughter, Caroline, approached her outside the mercantile. Caroline was a sweet girl of 20, engaged to the blacksmith's son, and one of the few women in town who didn't treat Rachel with open disapproval. "Miss Kingston, I wanted to ask you something," Caroline said hesitantly. "My William and I, we're getting married in June, and we're hoping to start a small ranch of our own eventually. William's wonderful, but he doesn't know much about cattle or horses. I was wondering if, maybe, you might be willing to teach us some things. I know it's unusual to ask, but you've done so well with your ranch, and I thought—" Rachel felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I'd be happy to help you both, Caroline. Why don't you and William come out to the ranch some Sunday afternoon? I can show you around and give you some basic information to start with." Caroline's face lit up. "Oh, thank you, Miss Kingston. William will be so pleased. He admires what you've done, even if he doesn't say so in front of the other men. They give him grief about it, you know, saying he shouldn't respect a woman who does man's work." "But William respects me anyway?" Rachel asked. "He says that intelligence and hard work deserve respect regardless of who's doing it," Caroline said firmly. "And I agree with him. That's one of the reasons I'm marrying him." Rachel impulsively hugged the younger woman. "You've made my day, Caroline. You and William are going to do just fine." As she drove her wagon home that afternoon, Rachel felt lighter than she had in months. Maybe she didn't need the approval of the whole town, but it meant something to know that at least a few people saw her for who she really was. 8 days after Carlos left with the O'Brien drive, a rider came thundering up to the ranch house. Rachel was in the barn checking a mare who'd seemed off her feed, and she emerged quickly when she heard Miguel shouting. The rider was young, barely more than a boy, and his horse was nearly done in from hard riding. "Miss Kingston," he gasped out. "Are you Miss Rachel Kingston?" "I am." "What's wrong?" "There's been trouble with the O'Brien trail drive. They sent me to fetch you. They need your help, madam, urgent-like." Rachel's heart clenched. "What kind of trouble? Is Carlos all right?" "He's fine, madam, but there's been a stampede and some injuries, and they're short-handed worse than before. Mr. Henry O'Brien said to ask if you could come help if you were willing. He said to tell you he knows it's asking a lot, but he wouldn't ask if it wasn't needful." Rachel made her decision in seconds. "Miguel, saddle my horse. Pack my saddlebags with medical supplies, food for 3 days, and my bedroll. I'll get my gun and my coat." "Miss Rachel, you cannot go alone with strange men," Miguel protested, though he was already moving toward the barn. "Carlos is there, and I'll have my gun. I can take care of myself, and they need help." Rachel was already running toward the house. She changed quickly into her most practical riding clothes, strapped on her gun belt, grabbed her rifle and her hat, and was back outside in minutes. Miguel had her horse ready, a sturdy sorrel mare named Copper who could handle rough country. Her saddlebags were packed, her bedroll tied on. Rachel swung into the saddle and looked at the exhausted messenger. "How far?" "About 12 miles northwest of here, near the pass." They made good time until yesterday when a mountain lion spooked the herd. They scattered something fierce, and in the confusion, some of the cattle ran through the camp. 2 men got trampled. They've been trying to round up the scattered cattle all day, but with the injuries and being so short-handed, they're in a bad way. "Lead on," Rachel said grimly. They rode hard, pushing the horses but not breaking them. The messenger, whose name was Billy, had been hired in Victor the same day Carlos was, and he was full of praise for the O'Brien brothers and concern for the injured men. "Mr. Henry, he's the finest trail boss I've ever worked for, and I've been on 3 drives," Billy said as they rode. "Fair, smart, doesn't ask anything of his men he won't do himself." When the stampede started, he rode right into it, turning the leaders before they could run off a cliff. Saved hundreds of head and probably saved lives too. They reached the camp in the early afternoon. The scene was organized chaos. Cattle were scattered across a broad valley, and Rachel could see riders working to bunch them up and hold them. Near a grove of cottonwoods, a rough camp had been set up with a chuck wagon and bedrolls. Henry O'Brien saw them coming and rode to meet them. He looked exhausted, his clothes torn and dirty, a bruise darkening his jaw, but his eyes were alert and focused. "Rachel," he said, swinging down from his horse. "Thank you for coming. I know it's a lot to ask." "Tell me what you need," she said simply, dismounting. The relief on his face was profound. 2 men are injured. One broke his leg when his horse went down during the stampede. The other got trampled and has broken ribs and maybe internal injuries. We've done what we can, but we need to get them to a doctor. Samuel's been watching them, but I need every able rider working the herd. We're still missing about 300 head, and we need to round them up and get moving before another predator comes through, or before rustlers decide we're easy pickings. Where are the injured men? Henry pointed to the camp, and Rachel grabbed her saddlebags and hurried over. She found Samuel O'Brien sitting with 2 pale, pain-racked cowboys. One, a man in his 30s, had his leg splinted, but the break was clearly bad. The other, younger, was lying very still and breathing shallowly. Rachel knelt beside them and began a quick but thorough examination, using the medical knowledge her father had insisted she learn. The leg break was clean but needed proper setting by a doctor. The trampled man was more concerning. His ribs were definitely broken, and when she gently probed his abdomen, his cry of pain told her he likely had internal injuries. "He needs a doctor immediately," Rachel said to Samuel. "The other one can travel if we secure the leg properly, but this one is in bad shape." "Victor's the closest town, about 15 miles, Samuel said, "but we can't spare men to take them and still manage the herd." Rachel made another quick decision. "I'll take them. I've got a light wagon back at my ranch. If you can spare 2 men to help me get them there, I can load them in the wagon and get them to Dr. Morrison in Victor." "That'll take you all day and half the night," Samuel protested. "Then I'd better get started." Henry appeared beside them. "Rachel, that's too much. We can't ask you to do that." She stood and faced him squarely. "You're not asking, I'm offering. These men need help and I can provide it. I won't let them suffer or die because you're too proud to accept assistance." Henry looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. It wasn't gratitude exactly or surprise. It was recognition, as if he was seeing something in her that confirmed a suspicion or answered a question. "All right," he said quietly. "Thank you. Carlos and Billy will ride with you to your ranch to help load the men into the wagon. Take my best horse for the wagon team. He's steady and strong." They worked quickly. The injured men were secured as comfortably as possible on makeshift stretchers, and Rachel, Carlos, and Billy set off at a careful pace toward the Kingston ranch. It took 2 hours of painstaking travel, trying to avoid jostling the injured men too much while still making decent time. Miguel was shocked when they arrived, but he helped without question. They hitched up Rachel's wagon, loaded it with hay and blankets to cushion the injured men, and transferred them as gently as possible. Rachel changed to a fresh horse for the wagon team's partner, one of her steadiest mares. "I will come with you," Miguel announced. "No, I need you here to watch the ranch. Carlos, you should go back to the herd, they need you. Billy, you're exhausted. Stay here and rest, then ride back in the morning. Miss Kingston, you cannot drive a wagon to town alone at night with injured men," Miguel said. "It is not safe." "I've got my rifle and my pistol, and I know every inch of the road. I'll be fine." She wouldn't be talked out of it, and finally, they let her go. The drive to Victor was long and anxious. The injured man with the broken leg bore the journey stoically, but the trampled man faded in and out of consciousness, moaning softly. Rachel pushed the team as hard as she dared, and the sun was setting as she drove into Victor's Main Street. "Doctor." Morrison came running when she pulled up to his office and shouted for help. Within minutes, willing hands were carrying the injured men inside. The doctor took one look at the trampled man, and his face grew grave. "He needs surgery immediately," Dr. Morrison said. "This is beyond my capabilities. We need to get him to the hospital in Colorado Springs." "That's 40 miles, Rachel said. "Will he survive the trip? Probably not in a wagon, but there's a train leaving at midnight from the station in Divide. If we can get him there, and if the railroad agrees to make an unscheduled stop in Divide, he might have a chance." Rachel didn't hesitate. "I'll take him. Let me get a fresh team. Doctor, you'll need to come along to care for him during the journey." 2 hours later, with a fresh team purchased on credit from the livery, Rachel was driving through the darkness toward Divide, a small railroad town about 12 miles away. Dr. Morrison rode beside her, tending the injured man as best he could in the jostling wagon. The doctor had given the cowhand laudanum for the pain, and he drifted in a restless, drug-hazed state. They reached Divide at 11:30 and found the small station house. The station master was skeptical at first, unwilling to flag down a scheduled train for an emergency. But Rachel's passionate argument and Dr. Morrison's professional authority finally convinced him. He sent the signal, and at 5 minutes past midnight, a southbound train screeched to a halt at the Divide station. The conductor was irritated until he saw the injured man. Railroad men had a brotherhood of sorts, a respect for those who risked their lives in dangerous work, and cowboys fell into that category. The injured man was loaded into a passenger car. Dr. Morrison climbed aboard to accompany him to Colorado Springs, and the train pulled away into the night. Rachel stood on the platform, swaying with exhaustion. She'd been awake for 20 hours, had ridden 12 miles, driven to Victor, then driven another 12 miles to Divide, all while worrying about 2 injured men and a scattered herd of cattle. The station master took pity on her and offered his back room for the night. "You can stable your horses in back and catch a few hours' sleep, miss. There's a northbound train at 8 in the morning if you want to leave the wagon and team here and ride back to Victor." Rachel accepted gratefully. She tended to the horses first, making sure they were fed, watered, and rubbed down. Then she collapsed on the narrow cot in the station master's back room and was asleep in seconds. She woke at dawn, stiff and sore, her injured shoulder throbbing from the hard work and long drive. But there was no time to coddle herself. She declined the train ride, knowing she needed her wagon, and instead set out on the return journey to Victor after a quick breakfast of coffee and bread. She reached Victor by mid-morning, stopped long enough to check on the cowboy with the broken leg who Dr. Morrison's assistant assured her was resting comfortably, then drove back to her ranch. She'd been gone for more than 24 hours, and she was desperately tired. Miguel rushed out when he heard the wagon. "Miss Rachel, thank God. We heard the man was taken to Colorado Springs. Will he live?" "I don't know," Rachel said honestly, "but he has a chance now." She climbed down from the wagon seat, her legs nearly buckling. Miguel steadied her. "You must rest now," he said firmly. "I need to check the stock, and I should ride out to see if the O'Briens need more help." "No, you will rest. I have handled the stock." Carlos returned this morning and said the O'Briens have rounded up most of the scattered cattle and will reach the Pueblo railhead in 3 days. They will come here after to settle accounts. You have done enough, more than enough. Now you will eat and sleep, or I will tie you to the bed myself. Rachel was too tired to argue. She went inside, managed to eat some of the stew Miguel's wife had sent over, and fell into her bed fully clothed. She slept for 14 hours straight. When she woke, it was morning again and she felt almost human. She bathed, changed clothes, tended to her healing shoulder, and went outside to check on her ranch. Everything was in order thanks to Miguel. The cattle were fine, the horses were exercised, the chickens fed. She spent the day catching up on routine work and trying not to think about whether the trampled Cowboy had survived, or how Henry O'Brien was managing his depleted crew, or why she cared so much about a man she barely knew. 3 days later, just as Carlos had predicted, 4 riders came up the road to the Kingston ranch. Rachel was on the porch, mending a bridle, when she saw them coming. Her heart began to beat faster and she stood, setting aside the leather work. Henry O'Brien dismounted and walked toward her, his brothers and Carlos following. He looked tired but triumphant, and when he met her eyes, his smile was warm and genuine. "We made it," he said simply. "Sold the herd for a good price, got the cattle to the railhead with only minimal additional losses. We couldn't have done it without your help, Rachel." "I'm glad you made it," Rachel said. "Have you heard anything about the injured men?" Henry's smile faded slightly. "The man with the broken leg is doing well. Doc Morrison says he'll heal up fine. The other man, the one you got to Colorado Springs, he's alive. The doctors operated and they say he'll pull through, though he'll need weeks of recovery. They said another hour's delay and he'd have bled to death internally. You saved his life, Rachel." Relief flooded through her so intensely she had to sit down. "Thank God," she whispered. Henry sat down beside her on the porch step. "You did an incredible thing. You dropped everything, rode out to help strangers, drove through the night to get an injured man to help. You didn't ask for anything in return, and you put yourself at risk to help men you barely knew." "Anyone would have done the same," Rachel said uncomfortably. "No," Henry said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have sent their regrets and stayed safe at home. You rode out alone, took charge of a crisis situation, and did what needed to be done without hesitation. That takes courage and compassion and strength of character." Rachel didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to praise, especially not from men who usually saw her independence as a character flaw rather than a strength. Samuel and Thomas had been talking with Miguel and Carlos, but now they approached the porch. Samuel carried a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. "Miss Kingston, this is Carlos's wages for the drive, plus a bonus for exceptional work," Samuel said, handing the pouch to her. "He worked harder than men twice his age and never complained. You trained him well." Rachel passed the pouch to Carlos, who looked stunned by the weight of it. "This is yours, Carlos. You earned it." "Miss Rachel, this is more than we agreed on," Carlos said. "Then you earned a bonus," Rachel said with a smile. "Well done." Henry stood and pulled an envelope from his pocket. "This is for you, Rachel. For the use of your men, for the medical supplies you provided, for the wagon trip and the train fare and every other expense you incurred helping us." Rachel shook her head. "I didn't help you for money, Henry. I know you didn't. But expenses are expenses and we pay our debts. Please take it." Reluctantly, Rachel accepted the envelope. When she opened it later, she'd find that Henry had included far more than the actual expenses, but right now, she was more focused on the man in front of her. "Will you be heading back to Texas now?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Actually, we were hoping to stay in the area for a while," Henry said. "We want to look at ranch properties and breeding stock. Samuel thinks we should expand into Colorado, establish a second ranch here where we can raise the hardier mountain cattle, and then drive them to Texas for sale." "That sounds like a solid business plan," Rachel said, her heart lifting slightly at the news that he wouldn't be leaving immediately. "We were also hoping," Henry continued, "that you might be willing to advise us on properties and stock. You know this country and these ranchers. We'd pay you for your time and expertise, of course." "You don't need to pay me for advice," Rachel said. "I'd be happy to help. There are some good properties available, and I know which ranchers have the best breeding stock." "Then perhaps you join us for dinner in town tonight?" Henry asked. "We can discuss possibilities, and I'd like to hear more about how you've managed to build such a successful operation on your own." Rachel hesitated. Dining in public with four men would cause talk, but then again, her reputation was already so damaged that a little more scandal hardly mattered. And she wanted to spend more time with Henry, to continue the conversations that had revealed him to be intelligent, respectful, and genuinely interested in her opinions. "All right," she agreed. "I'll meet you at the hotel restaurant at 6 o'clock. That evening, Rachel dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep green that matched her eyes. It wasn't fancy by city standards, but it was respectable and feminine without being fussy. She braided her hair and coiled it at the nape of her neck, then drove her wagon into town. The hotel restaurant was the nicest dining establishment in Victor, and when Rachel walked in with the O'Brien brothers, every conversation stopped. Rachel held her head high and ignored the stares as Henry pulled out her chair. They ordered steaks and potatoes, and the conversation flowed easily. The O'Brien brothers were educated, well-traveled, and knowledgeable about ranching. They asked Rachel detailed questions about water rights, grazing practices, winter feeding, and local market conditions. She found herself relaxing, enjoying the intellectual stimulation of talking shop with people who took her seriously. "Our father always said the best ranchers were the ones who paid attention to detail and were willing to learn from anyone, regardless of status or background," Henry said over coffee. "He'd have liked you, Rachel. You think like a true rancher, not like someone playing at it." "That's quite a compliment," Rachel said. "Thank you." "I've been thinking," Henry said, setting down his coffee cup and leaning forward slightly, "about something you said when we first met. You said people in town give you grief about how you run your operation." "I'm guessing they give you grief about more than that." Rachel stiffened slightly. "I'm sure you've heard the talk." "Some," Henry admitted. "About how you're too independent, too headstrong, too unwilling to marry and settle down like a proper woman should. And you're wondering if it's true." Rachel asked, her voice cooling. "No," Henry said, his gray eyes serious. "I'm wondering why people think independence and strength are flaws instead of virtues. You run a successful ranch, you make sound business decisions, you're skilled and knowledgeable and capable. Those are exactly the qualities any good rancher should have. The fact that you're a woman doesn't change that. If anything, it makes it more impressive because you've had to work twice as hard to prove yourself." Rachel stared at him, caught off guard by his words. "Most men don't see it that way." "Most men are fools," Samuel interjected. "No offense to present company, but it's true. A woman with your skills and determination would be an asset to any ranch, any business, any partnership. The men who can't see that are the ones who are lacking, not you." Thomas, the youngest brother, nodded agreement. Pa always said that pride was the downfall of many a good man. Too proud to admit a woman might know more, might be stronger, might be smarter. He taught us to respect competence wherever we found it. Rachel felt tears prickling her eyes and blinked them away fiercely. She wasn't used to this, to being seen and valued for who she really was instead of being judged for what she wasn't. "Thank you," she managed to say. "You don't know what it means to hear that." Henry reached across the table and briefly touched her hand, a gesture of comfort and connection that sent warmth racing up her arm. "For what it's worth, Rachel, I think the men who have courted you and tried to change you were idiots. Your strength doesn't make you less feminine or less desirable. It makes you remarkable." Their eyes met and held, and in that moment Rachel felt something shift between them. This wasn't just mutual respect between fellow ranchers. This was something deeper, more personal, more dangerous to her carefully guarded heart. She pulled her hand back gently. "We should discuss properties. You mentioned you wanted advice on what might be available." Henry let her change the subject, but the warmth in his eyes remained. They spent the next hour discussing ranches for sale in the area, water rights, access to markets, and the challenges of Colorado winters. By the time they finished, the restaurant was nearly empty, and the owner was giving them pointed looks. Outside, under the stars, Henry walked Rachel to her wagon. "When can we go look at some of these properties?" "I'm free tomorrow afternoon if you want to start," Rachel offered. "Tomorrow afternoon it is. We'll come by the ranch at 1 o'clock. I'll be ready." Henry helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hands strong and steady at her waist. He held on for just a moment longer than necessary, looking up at her in the lamplight spilling from the hotel windows. "Rachel, I want you to know something. I've met a lot of people in my travels, a lot of ranchers and business people and adventurers. You're one of the most impressive people I've ever encountered. I'm glad we met." Rachel's throat felt tight. "I'm glad too, Henry." She drove home through the darkness, her mind whirling. She'd been content with her solitary life, had convinced herself that independence was worth the loneliness. But spending time with Henry made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was a different possibility. A partnership instead of submission. A joining of equals instead of a surrender of identity. But Henry was from Texas. Eventually, he and his brothers would return there. Even if they bought property in Colorado, they'd have to split their time. Was she willing to risk her heart on something that might not have a future? She didn't have answers, only questions that kept her awake long into the night. Over the next 2 weeks, Rachel spent nearly every day with Henry and his brothers, showing them properties, introducing them to local ranchers, and advising them on the merits and drawbacks of various parcels of land. They rode through mountain meadows and along creek beds, inspected grazing land and timber stands, discussed water rights and access roads. But it was the time alone with Henry that Rachel treasured most. When Samuel and Thomas went to inspect a barn or check fence lines, Henry would stay with Rachel, and they would talk about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his father's death and the responsibility of the ranch falling on his and his brother's shoulders. She told him about losing her mother as a child, about her father's determination to teach her everything about ranching, about the loneliness of being different in a small town that valued conformity. "You ever regret it?" Henry asked one afternoon as they sat beside a creek, letting their horses drink. Not marrying, not having a more traditional life. Rachel considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have children, to have a partner to share the work and the worries. But I don't regret staying true to myself. Every man who's courted me wanted me to give up the ranch to become someone I'm not. I couldn't do that, even for the promise of companionship." "What if a man didn't want you to change?" Henry asked quietly. What if he valued your strength and your independence? What if he wanted a partnership, not ownership? Rachel's heart began to pound. I don't know if such a man exists. I think he does, Henry said, turning to face her. I think he's sitting right here. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Rachel couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at Henry as he shifted closer. Rachel, I know we haven't known each other long. I know I have no right to say this when my life is in Texas and yours is here. But I can't let this opportunity pass without being honest. You're the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. You're strong and capable and intelligent, and you don't need anyone to take care of you. But that doesn't mean you have to be alone. A partnership isn't about one person giving up who they are. It's about two people working together, supporting each other, building something stronger than either could build alone. Henry, Rachel whispered, torn between hope and fear. I'm not asking you for an answer now, Henry continued. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility. Consider that maybe strength isn't something that makes you unmarriageable. Maybe it makes you perfect for the right kind of partnership. And maybe I could be the right kind of partner if you'd give me a chance. Rachel wanted to throw caution to the wind to say yes to everything he was implying, but years of self-protection held her back. You live in Texas. You have responsibilities there. Samuel can manage the Texas ranch, or we can all move here. Or we can figure out some arrangement that works for both of us. There are solutions, Rachel, if we want to find them. I can't give up my ranch, Rachel said firmly. I won't. I'm not asking you to. I'm saying we could be partners, equal partners. We could combine our resources, expand both operations, build something incredible together. You'd still be an owner, still have a say in every decision. Your name would still be on the deed. I'm not asking you to give up your independence, Rachel. I'm offering you a partnership that would make you stronger, not weaker. It was everything Rachel had ever dreamed of hearing, the words she'd never believed any man would say to her. But it seemed too good to be true, too perfect to be real. I need time to think, she said. Take all the time you need, Henry said gently. I'm not going anywhere for a while. Samuel and Thomas have been talking to the owner of the Triple Creek Ranch up north. If we make an offer and it's accepted, we'll be staying through the summer to make improvements and move in stock. That gives us time to figure things out. Rachel nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They rode back toward town in comfortable silence, but when they parted ways, Henry caught her hand and kissed it softly, his lips warm against her skin. Think about it, Rachel. Think about what we could build together. She thought about little else over the next few days. She went through the motions of running her ranch, but her mind was elsewhere, wrestling with the biggest decision of her life. Part of her was terrified of trusting someone enough to let them into her life so completely. But another part, a part that had been lonely for so long, yearned for what Henry was offering. She talked to Miguel, who surprised her by being enthusiastically in favor of the match. This Henry O'Brien, he is a good man. He respects you, Miss Rachel. He does not try to change you or control you. That is rare. Perhaps you should take a chance on him. She even, hesitantly, talked to Caroline when the young woman came out for her first ranch lesson with her fiancé, William. The couple was delightful, eager to learn and obviously devoted to each other. After showing them around and teaching them some basics, Rachel found herself confiding in Caroline about Henry's proposal. "But that's wonderful," Caroline exclaimed. "Miss Kingston, don't you see? He's offering you exactly what you've always wanted. Partnership, not surrender. He values your strength instead of trying to suppress it." "What if he changes his mind once we're married?" Rachel asked. "What if he decides he wants a traditional wife after all?" "Then he wouldn't be offering you equal partnership now," William said reasonably. "Miss Kingston, I've met Henry O'Brien. He came into my smithy shop to have some work done. He's straightforward and honest. If he says he wants a partnership, I believe he means it." Their encouragement helped, but it was something else that finally pushed Rachel toward a decision. A week after Henry's proposal, Mrs. Patterson cornered Rachel outside the general store with her usual litany of judgments. "I hear you've been spending a great deal of time with that O'Brien man," Mrs. Patterson said disapprovingly. "Really, Miss Kingston, at your age, throwing yourself at any man who shows interest is quite unseemly. Though I suppose beggars cannot be choosers. You're not getting any younger, and your reputation is quite ruined already." For the first time in her life, Rachel didn't just accept the criticism silently. She turned to face Mrs. Patterson with fire in her eyes. "Mrs. Patterson, I've listened to your judgments and your disapproval for years. I've let you and people like you make me feel like there was something wrong with me because I'm independent and capable. But I'm done with that. There is nothing wrong with a woman who can run a ranch, manage a business, and make her own decisions. There is nothing wrong with wanting a partner instead of a master. And if you can't understand that, if you can't see that strength and femininity can coexist, then that's your limitation, not mine." Mrs. Patterson gasped, her face flushing red. "Well, I never." "That's precisely the problem," Rachel said. "You never tried to understand anything outside your narrow view of how women should be. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a ranch to run and a proposal to consider." She strode away, her head high, and she didn't look back at the sputtering woman. When she reached her wagon, she found Henry leaning against it, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I heard that," he said. "That was magnificent." "I'm tired of apologizing for who I am," Rachel said. "Good. You should never apologize for being strong and capable and independent. Those are gifts, Rachel, not flaws." She looked at him, this man who saw her so clearly, who valued everything about her that others had criticized. And suddenly the decision was easy. "Ask me again," Rachel said. Henry's eyes widened. "Ask you what?" "Ask me about partnership. About building something together. Ask me again, Henry." A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face. He took her hands in his, right there on the main street of Victor, in front of anyone who cared to watch. "Rachel Kingston, would you do me the honor of becoming my partner in life and in business? Would you marry me, combine your ranch with mine, and build something incredible together as equals? Would you let me stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you, but beside you as we face whatever the future brings?" Rachel felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, tears of relief and joy. "Yes, Henry. Yes to all of it." Henry pulled her close and kissed her right there in the middle of town, and Rachel kissed him back with all the pent-up longing and hope she'd been holding inside for so long. When they finally broke apart, she was dimly aware of shocked gasps and scandalized whispers, but she didn't care. Let them talk. She'd found something infinitely more valuable than their approval. "I love you, Rachel," Henry said softly. "I love your strength and your courage and your fierce independence. I love everything about you." "I love you too," Rachel said, the words feeling both strange and perfectly right. "I didn't think I could love anyone enough to risk sharing my life, but you made me believe in partnership." They stood there in the street, holding each other and laughing at the absurdity of it all, at the fact that they'd found each other against all odds in this rough mining town in the Colorado mountains. The O'Brien brothers bought the Triple Creek Ranch, and the paperwork was finalized within 2 weeks. Henry and Rachel were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Victor, with Miguel and his wife, Carlos, Samuel, Thomas, and a handful of friends including Caroline and William in attendance. Most of the town stayed away, disapproving of the match, but Rachel didn't mind. The people who mattered were there. They honeymooned at Rachel's ranch for a week, and Henry proved he meant everything he'd said about partnership. He consulted her on every decision, valued her opinions, and when they disagreed, they talked it through until they found a compromise. He was affectionate and passionate, treating her like she was precious while still respecting her strength. "You know what I love most about you," Henry said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "What?" Rachel asked, leaning against his shoulder. "You challenge me. You push me to be better, to think differently, to see possibilities I might have missed. You're not content to just go along with whatever I say. You have your own ideas, your own vision, and it makes everything we do together richer and more interesting." "I love that you see it that way," Rachel said. "Most men would hate being challenged. Most men are intimidated by strong women because they're insecure about their own strength. But true strength doesn't feel threatened by someone else's power. It celebrates it." Over the following months, they worked to combine their operations into something even more successful than either ranch had been separately. They ran cattle on both properties, using Rachel's ranch for summer grazing and the Triple Creek for winter quarters. They bred her sturdy Colorado stock with Henry's Texas Longhorns, creating hardy cattle that could handle any terrain and any weather. Samuel and Thomas proved to be excellent partners as well, treating Rachel with the same respect they showed Henry. The four of them made decisions together, each bringing their own expertise to the table. Rachel found she loved having the brothers around, loved the camaraderie and the shared purpose. But it was the relationship with Henry that truly transformed her life. He was attentive without being possessive, supportive without being controlling, loving without demanding she change who she was. They worked side by side every day, whether they were mending fences or negotiating with buyers or breaking horses. At night, they would sit together and plan for the future, dreaming big dreams about what they could accomplish together. The first winter of their marriage brought heavy snow and challenging conditions, but they faced it together. When several head of cattle got trapped in a box canyon during a blizzard, Rachel and Henry rode out together to rescue them, working in partnership to herd the half-frozen animals to safety. When the roof of the barn at Triple Creek collapsed under the weight of snow, all four partners worked together to rebuild it stronger than before. By spring, Rachel was pregnant with their first child. Henry was overjoyed, but he made it clear that her condition wouldn't sideline her from ranch work unless she chose to step back. "This is our child, our future, but you're still you," Henry said when she told him. "You'll do what feels right for you and the baby, and I'll support whatever you decide." Rachel continued working through most of her pregnancy, only stepping back from the most strenuous tasks in the final months. She gave birth in the late autumn to a healthy baby boy they named Richard Henry O'Brien, after both their fathers. Henry cried when he held his son for the first time, and Rachel fell even more in love with him watching him cradle the tiny infant with such tenderness. "He's perfect," Henry whispered, "just like his mother." "He's got your eyes," Rachel said, noticing the gray color. "And your stubborn chin," Henry laughed. They settled into a new rhythm, balancing parenthood with ranch work. Henry was an involved father, helping with nighttime feedings and diaper changes, insisting that childcare was as much his responsibility as Rachel's. When she was ready to return to full ranch duties, they hired a woman from town to help with the baby during the day, allowing Rachel to maintain her role in the partnership. By their second anniversary, the combined O'Brien ranches were among the most successful in the region. They'd expanded their herds, improved their breeding program, and established a reputation for quality cattle and honest dealing. More importantly, They'd proved that a marriage of equals could not only survive but thrive. Rachel became something of a legend in the area, the woman who'd refused to give up her independence and had found a man who celebrated her strength instead of trying to diminish it. Young women started coming to her for advice, and she was always generous with her time and her hard-won wisdom. "Don't settle," she told them. "Don't let anyone tell you that your strength or your intelligence or your ambition makes you less feminine or less worthy of love. The right partner will see those qualities as the treasures they are. Wait for someone who wants to stand beside you, not someone who wants to stand over you or in front of you." Caroline and William became close friends with Rachel and Henry, and their small ranch prospered with Rachel's mentorship. Other couples followed their example, creating partnerships based on mutual respect and shared responsibility. Even the people of Victor slowly began to change their attitudes. It was hard to argue with success, and the O'Brien ranches were undeniably successful. Mrs. Patterson never quite came around, but others began to treat Rachel with grudging respect, then genuine admiration. 3 years after their marriage, Rachel gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Catherine Rose O'Brien. 2 years after that came another son, Samuel Thomas, named for Henry's brothers. The ranch house was expanded to accommodate the growing family, and Rachel and Henry built a life filled with love, work, laughter, and purpose. Samuel O'Brien married a teacher from Denver, an intelligent woman named Margaret who loved ranch life and fit seamlessly into the family business. Thomas eventually married as well, choosing a widow with 2 children who brought her own strength and capability to the partnership. The O'Brien ranches became a family empire, multiple generations working together toward common goals. On their 10th anniversary, Henry and Rachel took a rare evening alone, leaving the children with Margaret and Samuel. They rode up to a high meadow on Rachel's original property, the land her father had left her, and watched the sun set over the mountains. "Do you ever regret it?" Rachel asked, echoing the question Henry had asked her so long ago. "Taking a chance on me? Choosing partnership over a traditional marriage?" Henry pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. "Not for one single second. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Rachel. You made me better, made me stronger, made my life richer and fuller than I ever imagined possible. I thank God every day that I was smart enough to see your strength as the gift it is." "I was so scared," Rachel admitted. "So afraid of trusting someone, of letting anyone into my carefully guarded life. I thought independence meant being alone. You taught me that real independence means choosing your partnerships, not avoiding them. It means finding someone who enhances your strength instead of diminishing it." "We built something incredible together," Henry said, gesturing at the ranch spread out below them. "Not just the business, though that's successful beyond what either of us could have achieved alone. But we built a family, a legacy, a new way of thinking about what partnership can be. Look at Samuel and Margaret, at Thomas and Linda. Look at Caroline and William and all the other young couples who are building marriages based on equality and respect. We helped start that, Rachel. We proved it was possible." Rachel leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "My father would have loved you. He always told me I should never settle, never let anyone tell me that being strong was wrong. He said someday I'd find someone who appreciated what I had to offer. Your father was a wise man. I wish I'd known him. He's here with us," Rachel said softly. "In this land, in the ranch we've built, in the way we're raising our children. We're teaching Richard and Catherine and little Samuel that strength and gentleness can coexist, that men and women can be equal partners, that love doesn't mean losing yourself." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Rachel thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the years of judgment and loneliness, the struggle to maintain her identity in the face of constant pressure to conform. And she thought about the incredible gift of finding someone who didn't just accept her as she was, but celebrated her completely. "You know what the best part is," Rachel said eventually. "We're still learning and growing together. Every day brings new challenges, new opportunities to support each other, new ways to build our partnership. It's never static or boring. It's alive and evolving, just like we are. That's because we're both willing to keep growing, to keep adapting, to keep putting in the work," Henry said. "Partnership isn't something you achieve once and then coast on forever. It's something you choose every day, over and over again." "And I choose you," Rachel said, turning to kiss him. "Every day I choose you and this life we've built together." "And I choose you," Henry replied, kissing her back. "Today, tomorrow, and for the rest of our lives." As they rode back down the mountain toward home, toward their children and their ranch and the life they'd created together, Rachel felt a profound sense of gratitude. She'd been deemed too independent for marriage by a society that couldn't imagine a woman being both strong and partnered. But Henry had seen the truth that others missed. Her strength didn't make her unmarriageable. It made her perfect for the right kind of partnership. And together, they'd built something that transcended traditional roles and expectations. They'd built a true partnership, a marriage of equals, a love story that proved strength and tenderness, independence and commitment could not only coexist but could create something beautiful and enduring. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle rustlers and predators, market fluctuations and economic uncertainties. But Rachel and Henry faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle they overcame. Their children grew up watching their parents work side by side, seeing their mother treated with respect and admiration, seeing their father secure enough in his own strength to celebrate his wife's capabilities. Richard grew into a young man who naturally saw women as equals, who valued intelligence and capability over decorative femininity. Catherine became fierce and independent like her mother, but also gentle and nurturing, proving that those qualities weren't mutually exclusive. Young Samuel showed signs of being a natural leader, combining his parents' best traits. By the time Rachel and Henry celebrated their 20th anniversary, the O'Brien ranches were among the most respected operations in Colorado. But more than that, they'd become symbols of a different way of approaching marriage and partnership. People pointed to them as proof that equality and love could coexist, that a strong woman didn't need to be tamed or controlled, that a man secure in himself could thrive with an equally strong partner. The Kingston O'Brien Ranch, as it came to be known, passed down through generations, each one building on the foundation Rachel and Henry had laid. Their story was told and retold, inspiring others to seek partnerships based on mutual respect rather than traditional hierarchies. On a warm summer evening in their later years, Rachel and Henry sat on the porch of the house they'd shared for nearly 30 years, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Their grandchildren played in the yard while their adult children managed the day-to-day operations of the ranch. "We did it," Rachel said softly, taking Henry's weathered hand in hers. "We built something that will last beyond us." "We did," Henry agreed, his gray eyes still bright with intelligence and love despite the silver in his hair. "And it all started because you were brave enough to refuse to settle, to demand partnership instead of submission. You changed everything, Rachel. Not just for us, but for all the people who saw what we built and realized it was possible. We changed it together, Rachel corrected gently. You were the one willing to see past convention, to value strength over compliance, to want a partner instead of a subordinate. That took courage too, Henry. It still takes courage every day to buck tradition and forge your own path. I got the better end of the bargain, Henry said with a smile. I got you. We both won, Rachel said firmly. That's the beauty of true partnership. It's not about one person winning and one person losing. It's about both people winning because together, you're stronger than either could be alone. As the sun dipped below the mountains and the first stars appeared, Rachel reflected on the improbable journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd started as a woman deemed too independent for marriage, someone the world saw as flawed and unnatural because she refused to diminish herself. But she'd found a man who saw her clearly, who recognized that her strength wasn't a flaw to be corrected but a gift to be treasured. Henry had said her strength made her perfect for partnership, and he'd been absolutely right. Not despite her independence, but because of it, they'd built something extraordinary. A love that respected individuality while celebrating togetherness. A marriage that honored both strength and vulnerability. A partnership that proved equality and intimacy weren't opposing forces but complementary ones. Their story became legend in the mountains of Colorado. The tale of the independent woman and the cowboy who loved her not in spite of who she was, but because of who she was. It was a story of transformation, not of the woman who needed to be tamed or the man who needed to be enlightened, but of a society that slowly began to understand that strength in women was something to be celebrated, not suppressed. Rachel and Henry lived to see their grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. They remained active on the ranch well into their later years, scaled back but never fully retired, always available with advice and wisdom earned through decades of partnership. Their love story, which had once been scandalous and shocking to the good people of Victor, became the standard by which other marriages were measured. When Rachel finally passed away at the age of 78, surrounded by family in the house she'd lived in her entire life, her last words were for Henry. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me." "Thank you," Henry replied through his tears, "for letting me stand beside you." He followed her a year later, unable to imagine life without his partner of 55 years. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they'd built together, their graves marked with a simple stone that read, Rachel Kingston O'Brien and Henry Harrison O'Brien. Partners in life, love, and legacy. Their descendants continued the tradition they'd started, building marriages based on equality and respect, running the ranch according to the principles Rachel and Henry had established. The Kingston O'Brien Ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what could be built when two people came together as true equals. And in the small mountain town of Victor, Colorado, the story was told for years to come. The story of the woman who was deemed too independent for marriage and the cowboy who understood that her strength didn't make her unmarriageable, it made her perfect for partnership. It was a story of love and respect, of challenging conventions and building something new. It was a story that proved the power of seeing someone clearly, of valuing their strength, and of building something together that neither could have built alone. It was, quite simply, a love story for the ages, rooted in the wild beauty of the Colorado mountains and the wilder truth that real love doesn't diminish, it amplifies. Real partnership doesn't require one person to become less so the other can be more. Real strength recognizes and celebrates strength in others. Rachel and Henry's legacy lived on in every couple who chose partnership over hierarchy, in every person who refused to settle for less than they deserved, in every marriage built on mutual respect and admiration. They'd started a quiet revolution with their unconventional love, proving that the old ways weren't the only ways. That change was possible, that love and equality could not only coexist, but could create something more beautiful than either alone. Their story ended, as all stories must, but its echoes continued through time. In the mountains of Colorado, where the wild beauty of the land matched the wild courage of those who chose to live authentically, the legend persisted. The independent woman and the cowboy who loved her. The partnership that changed everything. The love that proved strength wasn't something to be feared or suppressed, but something to be celebrated and cherished. And perhaps that was the greatest gift Rachel and Henry left behind. Not just the successful ranch or the thriving family, but the idea that had once seemed so radical and now seemed so obvious. That a woman's independence didn't make her unmarriageable. That a man's security didn't require his partner's diminishment. That true partnership, built on equality and respect, was not just possible but powerful. In the end, theirs was a story about seeing and being seen, about finding someone who celebrates you rather than tries to change you, about building something together that honors both individuals while creating something greater than the sum of its parts. It was a story about love in its truest, most transformative form. And it all began with a woman who refused to settle, and a man who was wise enough to recognize that her refusal to diminish herself was exactly what made her perfect for partnership. Their love story, born in the Wild West of 1882, became a timeless testament to the power of respect, equality, and unconditional acceptance. It was a reminder that the best partnerships don't require anyone to be less than they are. Instead, they allow both people to become more than they ever could have been alone.